Welcome to Queers and Quills, the official podcast. I'm audiobook narrator Kirt Graves. Every episode, I invite an attending author or narrator to join me for a one-on-one conversation about their lives and their art, so attendees and readers from across the world can get to know them not only as professionals, but as people. Joining me today is Anna Ashley. Anna's books offer sweet and sexy romance with a charming mix of humor and heart. Getting her guys together wouldn't be the same without the meddling but well-intentioned cast of secondary characters who always insist on having their own story. When she's not crafting heartfelt tales, you can find her indulging in her favorite pastime of baking delicious treats. Yes! Enjoying quality time with friends, also good, especially if baked goods are there, or staying up late, immersed in the pages of a good book. Welcome, Anna Ashley, to Queers and Quills, the official podcast.
Yay, thank you. Thank you for having me here.
Oh, it's our pleasure. So let's start at the very beginning. What is your author origin story?
It's a bit of a Forrest Gump tale. You know, when he started running and he never stopped. That's kind of like what I did. I was at the time working full-time, and I was training as a workplace coach. And in one of my coaching sessions with a colleague who was also training to be a coach, I mentioned writing, and she asked me what was stopping me from doing it, and I didn't know the answer. So I looked a few things up, and I've looked how to structure a book, and out of the blue, like this story came into my head, and that was it. I started, and it was fun. At the time, I was living away from my family, so I had a lot of free time because I wasn't always traveling to see them at the weekend, so I had a lot of free time, and I just busied myself with that, and so I started and didn't stop.
So you start writing. You start writing, yeah. Do you start with like, I'm going to write a book?
Yeah, it's weird, but yeah, I had no experience. I'd read a lot. I've always been a huge reader, and I lived in the UK for a long time, and some of that time you spend on trains and public transport. So I always read a lot. And then when I moved out of London, I was driving a lot, so I was listening to audiobooks. So I think there's a lot of stuff when you're listening and reading romance that just stays within you. So you kind of like know intuitively how things go.
Right.
And then obviously it's not as easy to then put it together yourself when you're writing your own story, but things are there. And when there's no pressure because you've never published anything, you can literally do what you want. So that first book was super fun to write. Now, some parts are fun, but other parts there's a lot of panic, mostly panic.
When you introduce expectations into the game.
Yeah. And every time a reader says, oh, this book was better than one before. I'm like, no, just tell me that some of it was worse.
I know. Why do we as creatives hear that? I loved this means you hated the last thing I did. What is wrong with us? What is wrong with us? I'm so curious. So did you publish that very first novel? It went out into the world?
Yes, I did. Yeah. And I've heard a lot of authors say that their first books would never see the light of day.
Right.
No, it did. It was actually at the time with a publisher that I will not mention. They had a thing going on, and I applied to be part of that, and they accepted my story idea. Didn't know that I'd never written a book before, and but there was a word count, there was a word limit, and about 30,000 words into that, with 20 more to go, I was still sort of like in the beginning. So I dropped out of that and decided to self-publish. I knew nothing about self-publishing, but I just went with it. And once again, there was no expectations. It was just a lot of fun. The hard bit was when I had to start looking at things like book covers and teaser graphics and all of this stuff. Like it baffles me now when I think of all of the things that I have to do. And back in the beginning, it felt like it was so much. There was a lot less to worry about and a lot less to think about. But yeah, it was an interesting journey. But that book was published under a different pen name. I started out with a different pen name, and then I learned a few more things and decided to change my name. And also republished those novels. So that first novel, which when it was first published, was called Made in Portugal, and it's now called Home Again. So it's still out there.
I love that. I love that. Yeah, we talk to a lot of authors. Some are traditionally published, some are indie authors, some are both.
Mhm.
Uh, and we always talk about the pros and cons, but one of the pros of trad publishing is that the writer gets to be a writer, whereas indie authors, you are the writer, you are the publicist, you are the cover designer, you are the like on and on and on. You guys wear so many hats.
Yep.
It's truly incredible.
Yep. When I was doing this just for fun and I had my full-time job, I thought, and I was looking into doing it full-time, and it's a funny story because we just bought our house in Portugal, and we were sitting in this living room. It was empty. There was a huge echo, and I turned to my other half and said, "How about if I take a year off work
Yeah.
to try and make a thing of writing?" And he looked at me, and I think he probably wanted to murder me at the
Well,
time. But we did talk about it, and this was just before COVID. So I took a year off, and I
mm,
thought to myself, well, I've got a whole year to make all of these amazing things happen, and hopefully at the end of the year, I won't have to go back. And I thought, I'm gonna write so much, and I did. To be honest, I did
mm,
because nothing else was happening. But now I've had years where I have not written as much as I did when I was working full time because there is just so much more to coordinate. And when you go into things like audiobooks and translations, and you start looking at special editions and working with all of those vendors, it just becomes a huge thing. And
yeah.
it's fun because you get to know so many talented people, and make great friendships, but it's also a lot of admin work.
Yeah, it is. It is. I'm curious how you found your way to writing. Do you write exclusively male romance?
Yes.
Okay. So what was the journey to finding that as like this is what I love, this is what I want to do?
I've thought about that a few times actually, because as I said, I've been a huge reader for forever, and there was a transition period where I was still listening and reading a lot of MF, and then MM just sort of like slotted in because I was reading a series where one of the books was MM, and I really liked it, and as it is with Amazon and Kindle, I started getting all of these suggestions. I had no idea there was such a thing as MM romance. And I just started reading more and more and more. And when I decided to write, that was what I thought about writing. MF never really came into my mind. I don't know if it was
Hmm.
because I felt like I was too close to it. Um, and if I was writing MM, I could just be completely separate. And I still very much put myself in the shoes of the character. I'm always thinking like the character, but it's not me. It's the character.
Yeah.
Anna doesn't exist when I'm writing. I am, I'm sort of like taking that, and I write in order, so I feel the feelings that the characters go throughout the book. And towards the end of the book, I write a lot faster because it's the happy ever after. We're getting there. Even when things
Yeah.
get tough, we're getting there. So I'm feeling all of those emotions, and suddenly everything just goes really, really quickly. So yeah, MF never really had a chance.
Mm. Yeah. Well, I mean, you can't control what sparks creativity.
Yeah,
It's just what does,
yeah,
you know? Um, I'm so first of all, as a narrator, I also like that happens to me. Like when you start to get to the end of the book, it's like my most productive days are when the end of the like when it's like I'm suddenly going to be able to do like 2-3 hours, no problem, because you're excited to get to the end.
yeah.
Um, since you said you listen to a lot of audio, I'm curious if you think having listened to audio, if that affected how you write at all. Do you think about like how something will sound out loud as you're writing?
Yeah, because so I picture a lot of stuff in my head. So I when I think about a character's dialogue, I see it as a movie in my head. If I'm reading, I'm seeing it as a movie in my head. So there's always sound going on, to the point where if I'm very, very focused, whether I'm listening to something or whether I'm writing, if someone comes into the room and I don't see them, I will literally jump because I'm just like in a completely different world. And that happens a lot. Even when the other person says, I live here. Like,
Yeah,
how
yeah.
do you not know I could enter the room? But
Wear a
yeah,
bell.
right?
Yeah. Warn me. Say something. Yeah. Oh, I love that. So, like, you were an avid reader. What were some of the stories that influenced you? Um, Maybe as you were growing up, or as you were starting to take your writing journey. Like, what's really been something that you're like you point to and say like this really influenced me?
Not really sure, you know. Um, I I guess I loved reading the stories that I wanted to see, um and seeing that some of those the characters that I wouldn't expect to have a happy ever after in real life, that they
Mm,
did,
yeah.
whether they were queer or like, you know, bigger people like I am. um you don't expect them to have this amazing love story. So reading so much of that kind of like got into me, and it's stayed there since I started writing. I couldn't pinpoint an author or 10 or 100 that was more influential than the other, because all of them together were what made me the reader that I was, and I guess the author that I am. You know, I've got my own
Hmm.
voice, but my own voice came because I opened the door to all of that creativity that I was exposed to through the
Yeah.
books.
Have you ever? This is an experience I've had where somebody has asked, like, "Oh, did you ever read this person?" Or in my case, like, "Oh, do you listen to a lot of this other narrator because you remind me of them?" There's something, and God only knows what it is, that they're like, "Oh, I'm
Um,
reminded of this other person when I read your books or like hear my narration."
yeah, I
I
that
guess that's like, who do you get compared to the most?
yeah. Um, not from a reader. I do get, because I write contemporary small town. Sometimes readers, when I do polls or surveys in my group or my newsletter, they compared me to the usual names that we all recognize
Hmm.
in MM. But the closest thing that is actually very very true is my editor. A couple of years ago, I spent some time in Texas with her while I was waiting in between two conferences to go to GRL, and she says, "Oh, you need to meet Lee Blair. You know, she's amazing. She also edits for her, and I was like, well, why? You know, and she's like, you need to read her books. Like they are like yours." And I was like,
Mm.
okay, that's a bit strange. So I picked up Lee's brewery series, and I was reading it. I was like, oh my God, if I was writing this, this is how I would write it. This is so bizarre.
Yeah.
And I met Lee at GRL, and we spent some time chatting, and we have been chatting ever since. We have voice notes between each other that are over an hour long.
Oh my God.
Yeah. So I don't know. We are like the same person living in two different continents.
Mm.
But it's great, and it was lovely that our editor picked up on the similarity between us, because it's not like I'd ever read her. I don't think she'd ever read my stuff either.
Hmm.
It just so happens. I don't know.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Well,
that's
and
that's
that
the only.
I was going to say that also speaks to the power of like these in-person conferences because it's a
Mhm.
chance to actually meet other people who do what you do,
Yeah.
and find those people who are the other half of your brain sometimes.
Yeah, yeah. And we spend so much time on our own. And you know, where I live, we're very close to a city, but we're also very remote. And I can go for days without speaking to anyone else other than the other person in the house.
Hmm.
And you know, we're both still alive, so I guess we get on well. Um,
Especially after 2020,
yeah.
those of us who
Uh,
made it through.
but I do escape a few times a year to go to conferences, and I feel like I'm I'm not a different person, but I get a chance to be a different person. Like I get a chance to talk to the people who love the stuff I love. Like I can talk to him about the business, and he's interested in a lot of things, but he doesn't get if I'm talking about characters or the experience of writing something, or you know, the stuff that you only experience if you're creating that sort of stuff.
Hmm.
So it's amazing to be in the same room with people that then become your friends, and you get to talk about all of those things. It's just like I feel like my whole brain and my body just buzzes with all of that creative energy. And whenever I come back from a conference, or from an event, I feel so much more productive than before, because I feel like my well has been filled with all of that
Hmm.
positivity and greatness and love. It's great.
Yeah. It's something to look forward to for sure.
Mm,
It's going to be a lot of fun coming
yeah.
up.
Yes, and I'm so excited to go to Portland because that's where Lee lives. So I'm actually
Oh,
staying
wow.
with her. Yeah, I'm staying with her, and so I'm so excited to explore Portland. I've never been to that side of the US, so yeah, very very excited for that. I hope
Yeah.
it happens. Everything happens.
I know, right? Well, as I say, we're all crossing our fingers and knocking on wood that
Yeah,
everything still continues as planned,
yeah,
and
I
and
know.
traveling internationally is allowed, and that nothing has blown up. But so for people who haven't read your work, where would you say start here? Go read this first.
So I have a couple of series that are finished, and they're both fun, light. They're low angst, small town. So I've got the Chesterfield series where if you read the titles, it is what it says on the tin. How to Catch a Prince, a bodyguard, a rival, a bachelor. You can catch anything, even a billionaire.
Yeah.
In that series, and it's such a light-hearted, fun series that a lot of readers have told me it's a reread for them. My most recent series, the Spencer Brothers, it's also super fun because I've got three brothers, so there's like one sort of like story that ends with a third brother, and then I've got those secondary characters that kind of like wanted their own story. So there's like these little novellas, and they're just fun. And I got to put a little bit of the Portugueseness in them because they're sort of like half Portuguese. So I got to put a little bit of
Oh,
the family
cool.
dynamics and the grandma who knows everything and um doesn't take things lightly. Like you've got to do what grandma says
Yeah.
because that's how it is.
I was going to ask as you're writing these small town romances, like where are the small towns located? Because based on your background, they could be in many different places.
Yeah, so the when I started writing, so my first ever series, the one that I published under the other pen name, is a bit of like a cross the continents thing where it started out in New York and they came over to Portugal. So there's a bit of a crossover there. At the time, I didn't have a brand. I wasn't thinking small town or city. I just had an idea for that
Hmm.
particular story, and then it evolved from there. These series were a bit more thought out, and they're set in Connecticut around the New Haven area. So there's a place called Beacon Falls, I think. And I was just looking on the map on Google Maps is brilliant for a location, something that I could look at a map and say this is
Hmm.
where things are. And then there's a few other cities around there or towns around there that I then um did another series in there with a series that I'm still working on because then I can have characters crossing over to another series.
Ooh,
Yeah,
readers
which I
love
love.
that.
Yeah, yeah, I love doing
Yeah.
that. It's so much fun. In the Spencer Brothers series, I actually have a cameo from the two main characters in that very first book. So I'd never done a crossover with that series,
Oh,
and it was just so much fun to have them like all of these years down the line where they have kids and stuff like that, and it's great. And readers are tell me that if they've read that those books, they love that they get to see them all these years later, and especially because there's a Portuguese connection with both series. I had so much fun writing those.
yeah. 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 Crossovers are fun. Readers love them. I will say this, authors, tell your narrators because we don't always know. We don't always know that these two people who just popped up at the coffee shop are from another book. you
Yeah,
know,
yeah,
unless you hired the only one person for all your series. Like, so let us know.
yeah,
Let us
yeah.
know. Well, that's awesome. That's awesome. I have also invited you to play a little game. Are you ready?
Mhm. I
Okay, so the
am.
rules of our game are simple. I have a deck of cards, and on each card is a question.
Mhm.
These questions aim to learn more about you. Some are biographical, some are hypothetical, some are silly, but I will not be picking which questions you will answer. Fate will. So I'm going to deal 3 cards every round, and you choose one. Whatever card you pick, you agree to answer. with a couple of exceptions. So if a question comes along that you don't want to answer, you have two opportunities to switch things up. You can turn the tables on me one time, forcing me to answer the question, or you can also discard a personal question in favor of answering a more bookish question from the white deck. But you're only dealt one card, and you have to answer whatever question gets dealt.
Okay.
So, are you ready to play?
I think so. I hope I'll remember the rules.
We'll take it one round at a time. So round one, card 1, 2, or 3. Which one do you pick?
3.
3. Back in high school, or your equivalent of high school, what was the strangest thing someone could find in your locker?
We didn't have lockers.
Well, that's easy.
Yeah.
What was the strangest thing someone would find in your bag or cubby or whatever you were allowed to have? Desk.
Nothing really. No, because I read at home, so all of my books were at home. And in my school bag, it was just books. We had to carry all of our books all the time. So if you had a long day at school, you'd have a very, very heavy bag. And if you had sports and you took a shower at the high school, I don't know if it's a thing that people do now, but we could do it at the time. You just end up with like a whole lot of clothes and towels and all sorts of things in the bag, but nothing weird. I was a very innocent teenager.
Well, and then you grew up to do what you do now.
Yeah. I know, right?
All right. Round 2, card 1, 2, or 3. If you could ask one person one question and they had to answer truthfully, who and what would you ask?
I'm going to turn the tables on you.
Okay. All right. So you've triggered a new rule because I've already answered that question on another podcast.
Oh.
So you get another option on the white deck.
Okay, so that's a bookish one.
This is a bookish question.
Okay.
And fate has been kind to you. This is not a controversial one. Are you a fast reader or a slow reader?
I would say I'm a medium reader. So I don't take super long to read books, but I read I make sure that I read all of the words on the book. Like I don't skim read. I skim read a lot of stuff, sometimes important stuff like contracts and things that I probably should pay more attention to. But when I'm talking about romance, then I guess it'll probably take me. I read in the evening in bed on my phone. So it'd probably take me maybe 5 days to read a full-size novel, and that would be with reading like an hour and a bit every night. So I don't know if that's fast or slow to people, but I hear readers telling me that they read sometimes 3 books in a day, and I'm like, I don't know how.
Right.
I think my eyes would cross over.
Yeah, nor do I. I think some people do just like, I've talked to people about this, like they can just sort of like look at a paragraph and take in all the information.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, that's not how I read.
Yeah, I can do it because I've got the movie playing in my head. I need the time to make sure that that everything is correct in my head. And if I'm listening to an audiobook, I will always listen to it at the regular speed. I know people that listen to audiobooks at 1.5 or twice the speed, and I can't do that because it requires a lot more concentration, and I can't appreciate the narration, and I can't appreciate the story if I'm just listening to what's happening rather than listening to the actual like story as it's being narrated.
Yeah, it's fascinating how people's brains can be so different, how we can interact with the same thing so differently. Yeah. All right. Round 3. Card 1, card 2, or card 3? 2. All right. I wonder if this is a controversy as where you're from as much as it is where we're from. When you're putting the toilet paper on the roll, does it go over or under?
Over.
Does it hang over or under?
Yeah, it hangs over. It has to. How do you pull it out if it's under? Like it can get stuck, if it's like against the wall, it can get stuck. And also in the US, you guys have got like really, really thin paper. So if you put it under, then it just like snaps. So there's just only one way, and everybody else is wrong. I'm sorry.
I'm on your side.
Good.
I think that is correct. when you look at the patent for toilet paper rolls, that's how it's illustrated. It should go towards you.
Yeah.
But, to each their own. We have
Yeah.
to be diplomatic because it's a podcast.
Yeah. We'll
All right.
respect, even if they're wrong.
Even if you're wrong. Yeah. All right. Card 1, 2, or 3.
1.
1. How fast can you say the alphabet? You don't have to prove it to me.
I don't know. In which language?
Well, that's the interesting thing, right?
So we speak really fast in Portuguese, so
Yeah.
I can probably say it quicker in Portuguese than English, but then I spend a lot more time speaking English than Portuguese, so I don't know. I've never tried. We were doing a game the other day where we were in the car, and this was when I came back from a cruise a week ago, and my boyfriend said to me, "Tell me everything about the cruise in alphabetical order."
Oh,
So I had
God.
to think of an A and then a word. Oh no, but in like reverse, backwards. Not only
Oh,
did I have
gosh.
to go to do
So to
it, like
start with Z?
so Z. So what happened? What happened in the cruise that started with a Z? Don't know. We never ended up playing it because I was just like my brain just stopped there, and I'm like, you realize I've been flying for like a day. I'm awake, and that's as much as you're getting. I will tell you all the stories tomorrow.
Now, that's hard. Starting with Z, it's an unless there was a zoo on the cruise where they had zebras. I'm not
Yeah,
sure
no, there
I could
was
come up with
not a
something
zoo.
that had a Z in it on a boat. Was this just his way of making you stop talking?
You know, as we started this conversation, he left the room. He went to bed. But if he was still here, he would be nodding and saying yes. That was a way to get me to stop talking.
Listen, I feel like there was strategy behind this.
I just don't feel that sometimes my Portugueseness and the amount of words that I can say per second is appreciated by his Britishness.
Yeah,
And once
that's
again, he's
probably.
wrong.
I love it. I love it. All right, I think we have time for a couple more rounds. So,
Cool.
card 1, card 2, or card 3.
Have I done one yet?
I don't remember.
Okay, let's go with one.
Okay. What was your first screen name?
My first screen name? What's the screen
Like
name?
when you first signed up for like an email or like did you have like AOL Instant Messenger or like a gaming name, something like that?
I had Yahoo. My name was not available at the time. I don't know why, because it's not a particularly common one. The I didn't really use that for much. I use one name sometimes, and I hope that people are not going to search for me now. But things like when you used to do reviews for things, or leave comments in. There's a newspaper in the UK where you can log in and leave comments,
Hmm.
and sometimes I do that. I use the name Lusitana, which is to mean like a Portuguese person without saying
Okay.
that you're a Portuguese person, and which is a name that I do like. And that's
Yeah.
the only one that I think I've ever used. Because I'm not like I don't because my name is so short. My real name is Anna, so no one gives me nicknames or anything.
Hmm.
So yeah, I used that one for that. And that's the only
Okay.
one really.
Cool. Well, and then you get to have the fun of being an author and having a pseudonym later.
Yeah.
You're having your fun now. It sounds like you weren't putting anything scandalous in your bag in school,
No,
but you
I'm
can
doing
put
everything
scandalous
in.
things in books.
Yeah, I'm doing everything in reverse. Absolutely. Like I didn't, and I moved to London when I was 20. So living on your own in a city in a huge city when you grew up in the countryside in a small town is such a change that I was focused on work, on making sure that I didn't do anything silly that put me in danger, and
Hmm.
making sure that I paid rent and bills and stuff like that. So all of my 20s were, I was a very good girl because I was living in such a huge place. And then as I experienced other things, I started traveling more and experiencing more things. But definitely since I've started writing, the world has opened up to me, and I've been to
Yeah.
places I never thought I would. And where I grew up, going to somewhere like Australia or even the US, it wasn't something that we did. We've got a coast, we have beaches, so you don't go on holiday abroad. Why would you? Because you can drive an hour to the beach. So that's kind of like that. That's the size of the world that I grew up in. I guess now it's slightly different. People travel more. There's all of these budget airlines that you can go to Paris and London in a couple of hours, and it doesn't cost that much.
Right.
Or it didn't used to cost that much up until recently.
Oh, God.
So the world is a lot different, and I'm definitely experiencing a lot more of it and having a lot more fun experiences.
Yeah, I'm very much the same way. The world of romance novels really opened my eyes to a lot of things.
Yeah. And
I've learned a lot.
Yeah, and I see romance in a lot more places. It's probably not there, but I put it there in my head. If I see people having a conversation in a cafe, or the way that they're walking or talking or whatever, I will just imagine that they might be on a first date or whatever. And I'm always thinking of like the romantic side of everything, which is also quite fun to do.
Yeah, that's a good way. It's not a bad way to walk through life.
No, it's not.
Thinking that people could fall in love. Any two people you see could, or three people or four people.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Last round. Card 1, card 2, or card 3.
3.
What technology do you wish existed?
I don't know. What I wish I could have is like a PA that could run my whole life for me, that kind of like lived with me, but not like should be here. And I love my PAs. I have two. And poor Layla has to bear the brunt of my demands. But yeah, that would be the thing. Like if my PA could be around like all day and do stuff with me, but then when I need to be on my own, she could just like go away without me having to ask anything. That would be like, can we have that technology to make it to make real people appear to you when you want it, when you need them?
Like a teleporter.
Yeah.
Sounds good to me. Yeah. Speaking of budget travel, if it could be a lot easier to get places.
Yeah, I know, right?
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you for being brave and playing the game and answering some silly questions. I really appreciate it. It was so nice getting to meet and chat with you. Thank you so much for doing this.
No, thank you for having me. It was a lot of fun. I was a bit nervous, but you always do, because before you do something like this, you're always a little bit nervous.
Yes.
And the more nervous I am, the more my hands come out. That's just how it is.
Oh my gosh, I've seen so much worse. You were good.
But that's because there's this bit under the laptop that you can't see that is still moving.
Smart cropping is important. Yes.
Yeah.
So thank you. Thank you, listeners, for joining us for Queers and Quills, the official podcast. If you're already signed up to attend Queers and Quills, make sure to say hello to me and to Anna at the Oregon Convention Center in May. And if you're not, follow Queers and Quills on Instagram so you can see all the fun we're having this year, and you can get updates about ticket availability in the future. Until next time, I'm Kirt Graves, and I hope you're having a very gay day. Queers and Quills, the official podcast, is produced and hosted by Kirt Graves, in coordination with Mahogany Mail and Marley Valentine. All copyrighted material is shared with permission. Music and sound effects are licensed through Storyblocks Audio. All opinions shared are those of the individuals and do not reflect the positions or policies of any company or organization with which they happen to be associated.